suggestions to the relevant authorities and how we can actually go ahead with the whole carbon market system in Pakistan. So here we pay our extreme gratitude to the Embassy of Denmark and their colleagues from joining from there as well. Now, I mean, just looking at the title mentioned over here, that is light at the end of the tunnel, hope in the times of despair, and then just connected it to the theme we have around the carbon markets. I mean, we all understand that we find ourselves in the midst of a polycrisis. I mean, we've just witnessed some of the very extreme impacts of climate change. We're actually have a lot, which has actually created a lot of supply chain disruptions as well. We have also seen issues coming up with the regional turmoil and regional challenges as well. And there are a lot of simple issues that have actually sort of clubbed together to create this whole, position where we have a lot of socioeconomic challenges at hand. So, the repercussions of these challenges actually extend just beyond, key stakeholders to the lot of communities that are actually on the impact side of the things. So, on the other hand, the evolving global landscape has also propelled us to recognize the climate mitigation and the pursuit of a low carbon development path that are not mere options. So just to confront these challenges posed by the climate change and its economic ramifications, the mobilization of financial resources actually plays one of the very key important roles. This is precisely where various financing mechanisms come into play. And I think in this overarching discourse, carbon markets is a tool that is extremely important for reducing mitigation costs and mobilizing private sector investments in mitigation technologies and activities. It is this very topic that will be central to our discussions today. So now, just before going to the discussion, let me just set some of the housekeeping rules. The session is being live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. The recording of the session will be available on all of the SDPI's platform, and you may revisit the discussion. We'll also be forwarding you the relevant material as well as the recording in the follow-up of this event as well. For our online speakers, I request them to kindly keep their microphones off while they're not speaking, and please turn on their videos while they're speaking if their network allows to do so. We'll also be taking questions from our esteemed distinguished guests over here after the session ends. So now for this panel today, we have been joined by our esteemed Mr. Bilal Anwar, the CEO of National Disaster Risk Management Fund, NDRMF, who will be shortly giving us the opening remarks. We have also been joined by Dr. Sardar Moazzam, the Managing Director at National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. Will be sharing the session today. Ms. Samira Sheikh, Joint Secretary IC at Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination. Mr. Salam Fahim, the Country Director, Development Alternatives Incorporated. Mr. Khurram Lalani, who is also the Principal Resources Future Private Limited. Dr. Hassan Daud Bhatt and Dr. Khalid Walid. So again, thank you so much, everyone. Welcome you all for joining us today. And without any further ado, let me invite Mr. Bilal Anwar for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, SDPI, for providing this opportunity. Wonderful conference, and I had a chance to go into different sessions in the last couple of days, and very informative, very insightful discussion going on. But this particular topic is very close to my heart, and I can say even close to my brain. This is something which actually triggered my own professional career as well back in 1999 when I accidentally landed into the climate change arena, and my very first job in the UNFCCC Secretariat was to implement Article 6, 12, and 17 of the Kyoto Protocol. For those of you, if it somehow falls into the far or distant history, so Kyoto Protocol at that time was the instrument, a kind of an extension to Convention 1992, Climate Change Convention, and there was quite a lot of hype at that time about Kyoto Protocol, and Article 6, 12, and 17 were the cornerstones or the backbone of the entire implementation regime at that time. It did what it was supposed to do. We did a lot of work, and we actually started off a kind of a proof of concept, which we did at that point in time. So CDM will become kind of operational, which is Article 12 of the Kyoto Protocol, and then 6 was another sister kind of mechanism, market mechanism Protocol joint implementation, and Article 17 was the facilitating the trading of the carbon credits or the carbon assets, which were originated from Article 12 and 16. So that's a little bit of history. But I think the learning started from there, and it has never stopped until up to this point. And now the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is in many ways, it's very kind of a satisfying and refreshing to see that the Article 6.2 is very much built on the CDM regime. And in between, if we see from Article from 2012, when the Kyoto Protocol had its life, and there was a kind of a policy gap in between. So that policy gap was fulfilled by a number of voluntary mechanisms, the VCM1, gold standard, another one, social carbon, and a number of national level initiatives, EU ETS, which actually started with the Article 6, 12, and 17 back in the days. So I'm a firm believer of market mechanisms when it comes to the implementation and the mitigation action. And we know that other than in the climate regime, the market mechanisms have actually been successful in many other places. And the most notable one is the US SO2, asset trading regime, which is called, and that's where the whole concept was actually borrowed, and it actually found its place in the Article 12. So Article 6, there's a lot of discussion right now is happening, and I think one good thing is right now, and I've seen in Pakistan, but as well as in internationally as well, that now for the very first time, the overall climate finance question and the landscape is being looked and discussed within the context of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is about the carbon markets. So somehow this feeling and this understanding is emerging that carbon markets can provide can to some extent fill the financing gaps which are prevailing right now in the market. I don't know how far this is correct, because when we look on the financing gap, especially on the mitigation side, I mean, they are frighteningly humongous. And if we say that the carbon markets can actually provide the capital from the private sector up to that scale, I think there's a big question mark over it. But nevertheless, we know that given the market and the corporate sector and the private sector dynamism and the kind of innovation they can bring and experimentation they can bring, I think quite a sizable amount of funding can be mobilized through the carbon markets. So the potential is there. And what we are seeing, if we want to basically learn from some other countries in the region as well as a little bit outside the region as well, we know that for sure that many countries are really far ahead of in kind of creating the space and the ecosystem and the policy and the procedural infrastructure for evolution and the growth of carbon markets. We in Pakistan missed the CDM regime. In our right and left neighbors, there was about 6,000 to 7,000 projects which were established, and quite a huge magnitude of funding which was mobilized through CDM. And if not mistaken, in Pakistan, we had maybe more than 24 projects which actually were registered under the CDM, which actually is nothing. Even in the Paris Agreement context, although the rules of procedures of the Paris rule book, of what it's called, it came into existence, came into operation a little bit late as compared to other instruments of Paris Agreement. But nevertheless, I think we're taking our sweet time in terms of the designing of our infrastructure, and which should have been fully functional or to a reasonable extent functional up to this point in time. So anyway, what is done is done. The topic of the discussion for today is effective implementation of carbon markets. So I'm just going to make few points, and this is nothing new. This is basically building on some of the previous experiences, as well as looking at how some other countries have actually done it in their own territories, in their own regions, in their own industrial kind of sectors. So this is something which we can discuss, and I'm sure that the panels coming after me, they are going to be delving a little bit deeper into these very similar kind of questions. So there's one thing which is very popularly said about carbon markets in Pakistan is that there's a lot of potential. I think this is kind of reasonably correct, because for a number of reasons. If we look into our industrial sector, our carbon intensity in the industrial sector is pretty bad. And so any kind of a potential for energy efficiency, for process efficiencies. So there is quite a huge potential. But at the same time, our industrial base is pretty limited as well, and it's already very much constrained. So we have to be extremely careful and cautious whatever support mechanism we want to implement. So we do not want our industry to be becoming uncompetitive, which is already struggling. So I think under the carbon markets, or under the implementation of the different mechanisms and the procedures, I think that point need to be very carefully taken into consideration. Now, the other prominent sectors are, there's an agriculture sector, which is one of the dominated sector, the biggest sector of our emissions in our GHG inventory, which of course offers some potential, and some actually quite promising potential, which should be explored. Number of experimentation are being done. We see that a number of new startups are coming up, which are actually incorporating efficiencies across the value chain of agriculture, classical agriculture sector, as well as the agro industry as well. Similarly, transport sector, energy distribution, generation, a number of other sectors. So the potential is there. I mean, regardless whatever number we want to attach to that potential, but the potential is there, and that potential need to be harnessed, need to be reaped out. What is lacking, what is kind of a little bit delayed right now, is the government policy is still not in place yet. And if many of you, I'm sure that you're aware of it, that under the Article 6 of the Paris 6.2 and 6.4, the carbon credits which are going to be generated, they need to be adjusted. And it's not like this, especially under the compliance regime, it's not like this that anyone, any industry or any project developer, he or she can develop the project, and then they can go out and they can sell those carbon credits. Those need to be adjusted. There's a whole mechanism of, it is in the technical language, it is called corresponding adjustment, or CA, that need to be established as well. And for that to become functional, there is a need for a registry. I know a little initial work has been started by the Ministry of Climate Change, which is welcoming. And I think the industry is very much looking, and they want the kind of a technical assistance and technical support, that what is going to happen to their carbon assets in case they do develop the project and they actually, the project do become registered. So there are a number of sensitivities which are involved into it as well. The carbon market is not like any other market. It has a huge price variation or price differentiation, what is called in economics language. And the price differentiation actually depends on number of factors. Technology is one, geography is another one, sector is another one. But another point is, which is called the vintage point, and where the project is registered. That is also. So the project developers, they just cannot go on and develop the project on the lines of gold standard or Verra or social carbon or under the compliance market, until they are not really sure that what carbon regime, what carbon mechanism the project is going to be ended up. And that's going to be very much determining their price. And of course, if being an investor, if you don't know the price, it becomes increasingly difficult that how you actually justify your investment. So I think these are the few areas which are yet to be established, and a very clear policy line has to be brought out by the government. There's a policy which was discussed very recently at a very high level meeting. I was told that a very good discussion and deliberations happened, and the policy is going to be incorporating all the comments into it. But I think nothing stops the government. to initiate the work and to the extent possible, actually complete the work on establishment of the registry and number of other associated policy and procedural infrastructure and the frameworks, which of course is going to be helping the market. While the carbon market might be different from other markets, I think it still is a market, and it gets affected by what kind of signals and what kind of information is going into the market. International investors, they do want to come to Pakistan. In NDRMF, we actually get a lot of interest, both from local industrialists and investors, as well as internationally. And the one fundamental question they do ask is, okay, what is the long-term policy of the government? Because a carbon reduction project, especially if it is in the forestry sector or in the agriculture or in the blue carbon areas, the lifetime of those projects easily going up to the 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So of course they have to plan up to that time horizon, and the consistency and sustainability of the policy is extremely important. I think these are the few kind of areas at which the government have to basically send a very clear signal and clear information to the market. The rest is technicalities, which of course can be handled by different other institutions, including NDRMF and a number of other institutions who can actually come into the market, and they can actually provide the necessary technical methodological kind of framework for quantification, for monitoring, reporting, verification, for registration, a number of other areas. So I think these are the few things which I just wanted to highlight, and I'm sure that esteemed panel members are going to go further into those details. We very recently held a seminar in Karachi with the corporate sector on carbon markets, and we're quite actually bamboozled by the response we received from the corporate sector. So we got 19 in different industries in the room, and another kind of a pleasant surprise we got was a number of industries that were already well advanced in terms of developing a number of new initiatives, and without really waiting for what is going to happen. So those initiatives need to be honored. Those initiatives need to be supported so that we can bring them to the next level, and their efforts get rewarded and they get monetized in a fair manner. So thank you very much, and I very much look forward to benefit myself from the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bilal Sahab. I think firstly, congratulations to NDRMF for doing such a splendid work around the carbon markets work as well. We've also been following it very closely and look forward to collaborating. I think also Bilal Sahab has, I think, mentioned some of the very key pertinent points. I think definitely we all understand what we did wrong with the CDM as well. So let's learn from our mistakes and have a more forward-looking approach. So I think with Embassy of Denmark in Islamabad, we're also working around the implementation, not perhaps the implementation framework, but around what key components should be there, how the regulation should overall work around that. So for that, I'll be inviting Dr. Khalid Waleed, the Research Fellow at Sustainable Development Policy Institute, for his brief remarks. And then after that, we'll be starting the panel discussion. So over to you, Dr. Khalid. Thank you. If I could request the MIS team to kindly share.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Bilal Sahab, and taking your time out. My job was to set the stage and set the scene. I think scene is already set with your very detailed remarks. What I am going to present is the carbon markets in Pakistan, and slightly a different way to present it. It is equitable development, so that we can also have this, I would say, socialist kind of or equitable development perspective of carbon markets as well. After all, it is revenue. It is obviously for the climate financing or climate resilience and so on and so forth. Let's delve into it. These are some of the context. In terms of context, Pakistan is faced with obviously 3E crisis. I call it as 3E crisis because this is economy, energy, and environment. We are facing economic turmoil in terms of very low foreign exchange reserves. depleting imports, depleting exports, increasing imports, widening fiscal and trade deficits. In energy, because of that economic turmoil, we are compelled to use unsustainable energy choices. And then obviously the climate change, because of that, we are 8th climate vulnerable country in the globe. In 2022, we all know that there was massive floods. 30 billion of the GDP of Pakistan was lost. 30 million people were affected, and share of coal is increasing in power generation. So we need to build some sort of economic engine in front of our sustainability drive. These are some of the very ambitious targets, aims we have set so that we can achieve energy transition and increase the renewable energy share. This is we set in updated national determined contribution about 50% to reduce the GHG emissions by 2030. 15% comes from the conditional unconditional reduction, and 35 is conditional on climate financing from the foreign funding and foreign resources. In ARE policy 2019, we need to achieve 20% of renewable energy by 2025. In IGSAP, we have very ambitious target of 60% of renewable energy coming into our fold, so that we can have this energy transition going on. These are some statistics, what sort of financing and what amount of financing we need if we want energy transition in Pakistan. Pakistan's updated NDCs target 50% emission target. We need 18 billion USD to buy out these coal power plants of indigenous coal power plants and stop mining from the third coal. We need additional 13 billion that is required to replace coal power plant with solar and renewable energy. We need 20 billion upgraded so that we can upgrade our transmission system. So carbon markets, they are very effective way, but there is a catch that different standards now, they do not consider renewable energy projects as carbon credits or carbon projects. So we need to be careful about that as well. We need to look for other options as well. This graph shows how to integrate economy with environmental degradation. This is the first stage where when income level increases, environmental degradation, it also increases. In the second stage, when there is a tipping point and we cross that tipping point, when income increases, environmental degradation start to decline through different technological improvements, through climate financing, carbon credits, and so on and so forth. But Pakistan cannot wait for this tipping point. We need to act now. We need to make sure that we are linking our economic growth with renewable energy and with environmental sustainability. Again, Bilal Saab mentioned that the main principle on which carbon markets are based, it is the efficient markets. What is market? Market is where economic agent can gather to facilitate the exchange of goods and services, and these agents are buyers, sellers, and regulators. This is demand and supply. Demand curve shows the benefits. Supply curve shows the cost of a commodity. Where these two intersect, there is an efficient price of that commodity. In terms of carbon market, there is something else which is known as externality. There are some certain commodities, products, when they are produced, they incur some damages to the society or individuals. We need to incorporate those damages as a cost of production. So in that case, the supply curve would shift or tilt upwards, and now we need to have another price that would be efficient price. This is where carbon markets and solutions relating to carbon markets comes in. We need to have this sort of price. What we can do in Pakistan, we cannot tax the industries, as Bilal Saab rightly mentioned, that there should be balance between industrial growth and environmental sustainability. This would slow down the fast runners. We cannot simply afford the carbon subsidies because of limited fiscal space. Carbon markets, credits, offsets, they provide a viable economic option. But what we need to think is that how we can ensure economic justice, climate justice, and just energy transition at the same time, because as per Thomas Piketty, the new kind of inequality would be climate inequality. So we need to take care of that as well. For those who are not very much familiar with carbon credit, one carbon credit equals 1 ton of CO2 equivalent gases removed from the atmosphere, and it is exchanged in the carbon market. So it is 1,000 kgs of CO2 are equivalent gases. According to NASA, in 3 months time period, an average car produces about 1,000 kgs of CO2, which means if you drive your car for 3 months on average usage, it will generate 1 carbon credit, and we need to offset that as well. There are 2 types of carbon credits: reduction credits and removal credits. Removal credits, they are a bit expensive in the market. This is the manifestation of carbon, one carbon credit. About a 2-story house equals 1 carbon credit, 1 ton of. This is the potential. This dotted line, orange dotted line, is the business as usual scenario. And if we want to achieve net zero target, this is global, by the way. If we want to achieve the global net zero target by 2050, we need to go to that blue bar. So this is the difference between orange line and these blue bars. This is the actual potential of carbon market or carbon credits. So there exists potential, obviously, but there are different standards through which we can authenticate or register our carbon markets. Verra through verified carbon standard schemes. Then there is WWF's gold standard. And then mostly Pakistan's carbon credits are registered under GCC, that is Global Carbon Council. It is Qatar-based, MENA region-based standard. This standard, GCC, it is currently allowing the renewable energy or wind energy projects to be registered as carbon credits, but Verra and gold standard, they do not allow the registration under carbon credits. So we need to understand the pricing mechanisms and co-benefits. This is where the industrial sector would be very interested, and policymakers. There are some principles upon which the carbon market or the functionality or operationalization or the price mechanism is based. First of all, they should be real. There should be actual reduction happening. Then they should be measurable before the issuance of carbon credit and after the issuance or after the development of project. There should be measurability. They should be additional, no double counting. They should be unique and traceable. They should be verifiable. There should be a verifying agency, for example, those standards. Leakage optimality, persistence, they should be persistent. Climate equity should be incorporated in that as well. And we need to take care of costs in terms of labor intensity, capital intensity, etc. The projects should be scalable, and there should be innovations associated with these credits. How price is determined of these carbon credits? First principle is that where demand and supply intersects, that is the efficient price of a carbon credit. But there are other factors. Which standard has issued that credit? Well-known, well-established standards, they get higher price. For example, Verra, gold standard, ACR. What sort of methodology or what is the type of a project? For example, forest credit, they do not have that higher price as compared to engineered carbon credits or capital intensive carbon credits. Then vintage or years the credit were issued. This is an important factor in Pakistan, because I think we have missed the train in terms of billion tree tsunami, because we have lost so much of the time. We need to take care of that as well. In terms of country or region where project is located, if the project is located in global north, it has more price as compared to global south. I think it is due to the capital abundance or capital intensity in global north and labor abundant or labor intensity in global south. We need to take care of that as well. Again, additional and co-benefits beyond carbon emissions or offsets. This is very important for Pakistan, because we need to align Pakistan's priority. We need to align emission or environmental sustainability with economic growth and equitable development as well. So those carbon credits who have more co-benefits, those are priced higher. Nature-based solutions are forest, they are priced lower than the engineered carbon credits. Again, jurisdictional or project-based carbon credits, if those projects are developed under the government, they are more pricier than the private ones. So some jurisdictional factors comes into the market as well. Again, if the project is carbon removal project or avoidance project, that also matters. In terms of carbon removal, the carbon credits would be pricier. Other factors such as ratings, news, other things, they also affect the price of carbon credits as well. So this is how I relate carbon markets and equitable development. Borrowing from Dr. Adil Najam, there is a wrong way that carbon credits is a cheap way to earn money. Or the money is readily available. This is a wrong way to think about them. There is a dangerous way, that is, we are not incorporating equality in the carbon trading at all. We are issuing carbon credits just that we want to assure the status quo, the same level of production is happening. Then there is a right way that there is a actual economic case and we want to link economic growth with carbon credits. Then the good way is that we need to associate equitable and intergenerational investment in terms of carbon credits, so that we are actually financing climate resilience, we actually financing the climate adaptation and other climate justice aspects. So these are 4 ways we need to think, go for the good way. With this, the regulator or the role of the government would be very important, because now the government or regulator has to do 2 jobs. First is to ensure that there is efficient market, and second is to ensure that there is inclusive social development, and actually climate financing is going towards those who are being adversely affected by climate change. So to achieve efficient market, we need to look into for resources and demand. We need to look for financial mechanisms. We need to go for technology. We need to look for the markets. And then we would be having this integrated carbon market. The other aspect is the equitable development. First of all, there should be acknowledgement and remorse at the both sides, policy side and the private side, so that we can acknowledge that there is climate injustice and we are incorporating in our policies as well. Then we need to include those who are excluded in terms of financial matters, and then technology inclusion, so that the small scale farmer that is also capable to generate carbon credits in a way so that it can finance the climate resilience. Then again, local community governance, we need to have these local governance system going on, and so that we can have this grassroots level governance system. This will cause the integration between carbon markets and inclusive and equitable development in Pakistan. This requires long-term planning. This requires integration. This requires integration of research, academia, advocacy, and media, so that we can actually empowering those who are being faced with adversity of climate change. What the regulatory role should be: ensure the market competition, ensure that there is efficient price determination, ensure that there is climate financing and we are financing it through carbon markets, ensure that there are co-benefits in terms of energy transition, co-benefits in terms of social justice, and so on and so forth. We need to obviously ensure equitable development. And lastly, the regulator should ensure that there should be confidence in the project management and project development community, so that more and more innovative sort of, or with more co-benefits projects, they emerge in the market and we can trade that. So thank you so much. I'll leave to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Khalid, for taking us to this technical journey. I think you have very concisely highlighted challenges, recommendations, the basics, fundamentals, and we'll also sort of try to further build upon as we deep dive into the discussion. But I think this will be moving towards our panelists. If I could just request our panelists to kindly join us on the screen. Dr. Sardar Mohaz, please. Ms. Samira, please. Khurram Saab, please join us on the stage. Yes, first of all, thank you so much everyone for joining us today on this dialogue on effective implementation of carbon markets in Pakistan. I've been joined by a very diverse group representing the private sector, the public sector. So I think we'll initially start with getting a little of the view of the private sector and also then coming towards the public sector and how the response. So I think initially, Khurram Saab, I'll be coming to you along with being the principal of Resources Future. You also wear another hat of being leading the climate finance accelerator. So how do you see the current state of market preparedness of carbon markets in Pakistan? And I mean, secondly, if you could also highlight what challenges do you foresee? Also, I think just linking with what Bilal Saab also mentioned, that we did have some very key lessons coming out from the CDM as well. So over to you.
Right. So I think a very good preamble has been set up by Dr. Bilal and a very good presentation by Dr. Khalid. So I'll just reiterate in terms of the kind of talking points that I have. And I think we've already discussed upon the policy framework that is missing from the market. And I think at this point in time, as soon as we get to a point where we have a robust policy framework, I think that is going to be a better for the market. The second thing, I think, apart from the policy that's going to be coming out very soon, any market is an interaction between buyers and sellers. So imagine any kind of a market. Imagine हम जो हैं वो Sunday bazaar भी सोच सकते हैं. We could think of a Juma bazaar, whatever market that we have in mind. Essentially an interaction between sellers and buyers. So this is going to be a digital market. This obviously has to have digital interaction where buyers come and then sellers come and they obviously transact carbon credits. So any market would need the set of rules which are going to come out in the policy framework very soon. But at the same time, I think the kind of infrastructure that is required to enable the market interaction between the buyers and the sellers, I think that's sort of, remain a primary challenge, and hopefully I think we'll be able to improve upon it. So in terms of the digital infrastructure, there is one thing that we always talk about, which is MRV. Obviously, there is going to be a market. The market is then going to be monitored, reported, disclosures, and verification. So this entire architecture, which is going to be on the digital side, will have to be put in place for us to really transact better. And the last thing, I think, I'm just not going to talk about the kind of points that we've already discussed before, but I think this entire market is to be sort of, governed by the private sector. And it has to enable the private sector to come forward and really, take a very a leading position. It can't be only a sector which is predominated by a public sector. So it has to be a culmination of both public and private, but private has to come and take the ownership. So one challenge that I see is how we sort of enable the private sector to come on board and really take the leadership role. Could be anything, could be anywhere, but would be great to have those large corporates really come up with good, sound, investable project proposals. And when you think of carbon projects, I think, writing the PDDs, making sure that the carbon project is sort of essentially designed well, I think these are very minor parts. The challenge really comes in sort of sustaining the project over the life of the project, which goes for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And obviously that requires a lot of private sector agility, private sector skill. And the challenge is going to be not just conceptualizing the project, but I think, to be able to implement the project as well for a very large, for a very long gestation period of time. So Again, just very high level challenges, if I were to think of policy frameworks, market infrastructure, which is going to be very robust enough for MRV. And the third is the enabling of the private sector to really come on board and lead the project life cycles for 30, 40, 50 years, not really think about, the very basic 2-3 year project cycles where we come and really define the initial scoping, but then take it forward and execute it well.
Yes, thank you so much, Khurram Saab. I think just further adding to this point, be coming towards Salan Fahim Saab. Salan Saab, Khurram Saab also highlighted some of the challenges which actually come up when the private sector actually starts. It has and it starts coming in. How do you see this point? And also, if you could very briefly highlight, how can businesses actually turn these environmental challenges into economic opportunities through the whole carbon credit mechanisms? Thank you.
I think it's working now. Thank you very much, and great to be on this esteemed panel with my colleagues. I'll just to answer your question first, make a bit of a big picture comment, which is, personally, I think this whole conversation has become overly complex. So the first thing to do is to assist the private sector in Pakistan to begin to have a better understanding and to become more convinced that this is actually a market and an opportunity that they wish to participate in. That doesn't shine through very clearly in any of the discussions that at least I've been participating in, and I've attended a number of these at this present point in time. उसमें पहली जो चीज है, there's a few things to get clear and to get straight. Is to have a strong national level understanding from which then we can proceed into creating structures. The first is that whether we like it or not, we are going to head towards a warmer planet, which will fundamentally alter our own natural endowments, heating, rivers, availability of water, how agriculture behaves. The second thing is that there is a need, if we want to adapt to this environment and this emerging scenario, we need resources which, or by all assessments, we know we don't have. And the third point is that now perhaps is the time for us to innovate and raise those type of resources to help mitigate the effects of climate change. अब ये सारा जो this proposition, I think, has to be very clearly explained to private sector for there to be an understanding. The second thing is that I don't think there yet exists any kind of fundamental impetus, if you look at both mitigation and sort of adaptation, for Pakistani companies to start doing this. I think there's some voluntary guidelines, net zero voluntary commitments. ये voluntary पे तो कुछ नहीं, voluntary पे तो बड़ी कम चीजें होती हैं, realistic अगर आप हो. So उसके अंदर एक incentives, की एक जगह है, और दूसरा जो है, let's say coercive measures are also necessary. This cannot happen in the absence of first not actually having a carbon accounting system in Pakistan. But the answer to that, it's not there yet. So question mark, why not there yet? And then on the one hand, yes, you can have incentives. We can have voluntary carbon markets structures in which there are incentives, there's finances to be raised. The other piece of the equation is to start raising the cost of non-compliance, the cost of pollution, the cost of operating in a high carbon manner. वो है कहीं पे, वो भी नहीं है. आप मोटरवे पे चले जाएं अभी, brick kilns को देखें, अब तो पहले तो इधर-उधर होते थे, अब तो you have to breathe them in as you go towards Lahore. This is a big challenge, right? So let's start with some fundamentals and orient in an honest way. I think कि ये चीजें जो हैं इनको जरा देखें. Private sector, yes. To your question about the opportunity there. look, private sector will see the opportunity when private sector is animal spirits. It responds to one, some courses stuff coming down the road. करना ही पड़ेगा change. Doing business का तरीका change करना पड़ेगा. वो introduce कराए. दूसरी चीज private sector can respond to would be incentives. And I think we could come up with, a Pakistan-based incentive regime where cleaning up your supply chain is a good idea. Plus, if you work through the voluntary carbon market, system, maybe you can even generate some resources to invest into that. Like Engro was trying to do with, I don't know how far they got, but with some of their work around plastics recycling. So उस तरह की चीजें आप देख सकते हैं कि cleaning up of value chains could take place. We could incentivize that, and I think that's something the private sector would see as an opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much, Salam Saab. I think just taking lead from what both Khurram Saab and Salam Saab has mentioned, one thing which is actually coming here is the that we need to come up with the framework. So I think Ministry of Climate Change Environmental Coordination is coming up with the framework, and on the carbon markets implementation. So I'll be coming to Ms. Samira, if you could sort of shed some light on that, and especially how is the ministry envisioning the whole thing as well. Also, if you can also briefly highlight your expectations from different stakeholders, including the private sector, on how they can support your efforts as well. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much. My name is Samira Sheikh. I am Joint Secretary, International Cooperation and Ministry of Climate Change. Pakistan is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. According to German Watch Climate Risk Index, Pakistan consistently ranks in the top 10 countries. And this vulnerability must be put into perspective. Pakistan emits less than 1% of total global greenhouse gases. On account of extreme sensitivity to climate change, Pakistan began working earnestly to meet mitigation goals. After ratifying the Paris Agreement, NDCs were first presented in 2016 and later updated in 2021. I must say that 2021 NDCs are very, very ambitious for a country like Pakistan. Pakistan is committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 50%, and the cutoff date is 2030. Out of this 50% reduction of greenhouse gases, 15% is from our own resources, and 35% is contingent upon the availability of international finance. These pledges place heavy financial burden upon Pakistan. $101 billion are needed for energy transition to renewable sources of energy. So the question is, how do we finance the transformation needed to address the climate crisis? Many countries all over the world are looking to carbon markets as part of the answer. But the question is, why? Why carbon markets? First is incentivization. Carbon markets basically incentivize climate action by enabling parties to trade carbon credits generated by the reduction or removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, such as by shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy, or by increasing, this is the second one, or by increasing or conserving carbon stocks in ecosystems, such as forests. And second is reduction in the cost of implementation of NDCs. According to a World Bank study, trading in carbon markets could reduce the cost of implementing countries' NDCs by more than half, by as much as $250 billion by 2030. In other words, carbon trading could facilitate the removal of 50% more emissions, about 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year by 2030, at no additional cost. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement provides framework for carbon pricing to meet climate goals. And the government of Pakistan is finalizing policy guidelines and a governance framework for voluntary carbon markets. So I will tell you that this preliminary guidelines and the framework has been put up to Climate Change Council, which is headed by PMF. And it has 49 members, this council. And these preliminary guidelines have been shared by all members. After receiving their feedback, this framework will be put up to cabinet for approval. The government of Pakistan is finalizing framework for voluntary carbon market as a starting point. So according to this VCM framework, voluntary carbon market framework, private entities would be able to trade in carbon credits after verification by independent certification bodies. And everybody has talked about those certification bodies. Bilal Sahab has talked, and it was also mentioned in the presentation. VCM trading could be with or without corresponding adjustment. So let me explain this corresponding adjustment. The agreement on Article 6 has established an accounting mechanism known as corresponding adjustment to ensure that double counting does not occur. And that means that only one country may count the emission reduction toward its NDCs. Here are some other features of VCM. Carbon market would be open for trading in carbon credits to the extent of 50% of Pakistan's conditional NDC target. I talked about, those conditional targets. And that is 280.5 megaton CO2 equivalent. And the main sectors would include waste, transport, industry, energy, and agriculture and forestry. Finally, the aim is to put country towards net zero emission strategy by opening up compliance markets. And to achieve this objective, monitoring, reporting, and verification system, registry, and GAG inventory for counting of carbon credits would be set up. So now I will talk about my expectations from private entities. Private sector will have to build capacity to understand how carbon credits can be monetized and develop innovative approaches for structuring carbon revenues. And that means that private entities will need to identify sectoral emission reduction potential and to find out an effective decision-making tool for making the best carbon pricing deals. That's all.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ms. Samira, for highlighting the key points. And we really look forward to going into the details of this framework once it passes through that. So I think, again, I'll be coming back to Khurram Saab. Khurram Saab, you've also listened to some of the interventions highlighted by Ms. Samira. I mean, in your perspective, I mean, framework is coming up. In your perspective, what do you think would be the critical factors that would actually decide what perhaps the metrics of the success for such an implementation framework in the long run, perhaps as well? Also, if you'd like to sort of give any 2 to 3 solid recommendations at this point to all the relevant stakeholders in the whole supply chain. Thank you.
Ji, thank you. So I think we've listened to these events, and I think now a greater clarity is sort of emerging as what the kind of market framework that we're going to have. And thank you to Madam for elaborating on this. I think overall, I just want to make one point. Whenever that we see discussions about carbon markets, I think this could be my perception, and I could be completely wrong. The one word, if I were to summarize the carbon markets, after listening to all the frameworks, after listening to all the conversations, that one word to me is dollars. That we're, thinking about carbon markets and equating that with dollars, which is generally how it should not be. Generally, it should be about, and I think, you raised in the presentation very well, sir, where you mentioned equity. And I think that is the word that we should be looking at. So anything, I think if there is one thing that you would like to position our market, I think it is not for dollars. It is not as an FDI. It is not something that, we are bounded by some fiscal constraints. We're looking for dollars and hence tapping into the carbon market, because that is not the perception that you want to give either to the local investors or to the foreign ones. The perceptions and the impression that we should be giving is about meeting our own sustainable development goals and linking our carbon market with SDGs. So if there is one recommendation, I think largely, it is not about dollars. We should not really be talking about dollars. We should be talking more holistically about the local community action. We should be talking about the local resilience. We should be talking about things that we want to make our communities more stronger, enable them to really fight the menace of climate change, and make them more robust enough. So I think that's the kind of worldview that I want to take when I think of carbon markets. That's going to be a challenge because the way we sort of position ourselves, I think, needs a little bit of correction. The other recommendation, I think a lot has been spoken, so I'll just come directly on the recommendation side. I think we're not really talking still about the projects and the pipeline of projects that we need to have and sort of, enable us to really guide the way forward. And we don't want to start, large scale carbon credits project. I think what we need to do is to really start very small proof of concept projects. We always talk about POCs, and these POCs, the proof of concept projects, we should really be sort of, talking more about them and try and take those POCs off the ground so that once they become mature, more finance, more carbon finance can flow through them and make them more, larger in terms of their scope and scale. So starting off with very small POCs, very small proof of concept in forestation, renewable energy, waste, agriculture. And once we have demonstrated POCs, then we sort of, scale them up and make them larger and larger. So I think these are going to be the two defining recommendations that I have in mind. The third, I think, is the fact that the quantity of carbon credits don't really matter. I think the number of carbon credits really doesn't matter at a larger scale. What matters is the quality of credit. And I think, again, that's been discussed. We don't really need plethora of credits where those credits, by the way, those credits are being sold at a very cheaper price. A couple of years ago, those credits were sold at 10.5, 11, 12, 15. Currently, the market price is less than 1 for the highest quality nature-based project. I just want to, piggyback this with the fact that we don't need the quantity of credits, we need the quality of credits, and the quality of credits come when you sort of link them up with local communities, when you link them up with, making sure that our credits are SDGs aligned. If our credits are not SDGs aligned, largely it wouldn't really matter. There would be credits for sale, but they wouldn't really fetch us, dollars that we are looking at. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Khurram Saab. I think we're very rightly pointed out, and thank you for all those key suggestions. I think just again coming back to Salam Saab, just taking lead from, I think you also touched upon, the whole shift from the voluntary to perhaps the compliance, and I think Ms. Amira has very clearly highlighted that initially we'll be going towards the voluntary side of the things. But I think eventually, again, just my opinion that perhaps eventually we have to move towards the compliance side of the things as well. So how do you think, what do you suggest should be perhaps the transition of the journey, or perhaps what should be the way forward to go from the compliance, from the voluntary as of now to the compliance in a perhaps a bit medium or longer term? Yeah.
Okay. I'm less knowledgeable about compliance markets, so maybe somebody else can better address that point. But I think nevertheless, the first step to that is to get the voluntary carbon market system right. That's sort of why we are collected here, and I think discussing the subject. And we've just started foraying into the first steps into as a country into this space. So उसमें जो है पहले इसी के जो ingredients हैं उनको I think देखना चाहिए कि let's get those right, get the mixture right. I think it's really heartening that the ministry is now in advanced stage of issuing a guidelines on this, and it has top level support. That will be a very encouraging first step to adding more clarity and demystifying the carbon credit space inside the country. Or usme, I can suggest, like, let's take a look at the few practical things that do have to be done. The first thing is, I personally think that the barriers to entry in this sector are way too high. There's a huge degree of complexity involved. And if there's so much complexity before you can even get to the market, और बाकी किसी market में जो है, आप you have a product, you take it to the market. Here you have a product, then you have to assess it, then you have to get it verified, you have to do, then you have to get it approved, and then eventually you can even get a seat at participating in a market which isn't even inside Pakistan. It's in a number of countries outside Pakistan. अब यहाँ पाकिस्तानी कंपनीज को एक्सपेक्ट करना कि ये सारी चीजें खुद ही फिगर आउट कर लेंगी और सब कुछ हो जाएगा, ये बिल्कुल ही एक सॉरी टू से बड़ी एक नाइव एक्सपेक्टेशन है जो हम sort of sophisticated policy circles में तो हो सकती है, but why would any we have to sort of see that this is there's some pretty serious barriers to participation here. And one of those is also the fact that the crediting agencies are all international agencies. There's just 3 or 4 of them. I mean, I think a few gentlemen are here who could probably articulate. It's not terribly easy to get them here, to get them involved, to have them have a look at a project. आपने project set up कर दिया था पार्कर के अंदर या northern areas के अंदर, आएगा कौन उसको assess करने के लिए? Who's paying for all of that? I think there's a big question mark, or there's a अगर project जो है वो उसकी इतनी cost to set up and then sell है, you will immediately have very few actors left who can who have the financial wherewithal to go the full journey, which is why अगर आप पाकिस्तान में देख लें, despite awareness and जो कुछ भी है, 2 या 3 projects ही हैं. Everyone talks about the mangrove project in Sindh. So first thing is there a way that can be simplified? Can there be local partners of these organizations that can quickly and simply help in accrediting? Some of those ideas are already there. Second, credits की monitoring and evaluation के जो है ongoing implementation की community level पे कि हो भी रहा है, वहाँ खर्चे हो भी रहे हैं, नहीं हो रहे, ये भी एक बड़ी complex चीज है. और उसमें फिर आप उनकी quality कौन assure कर रहा है कि वो project हमने वहाँ गिलगित बल्तिस्तान में set up किया, फिर monitoring वालों को जो है वो co-opt कर लिया, तो वो report ही छूटी छाया होगी. चलें, बड़ी अच्छी बात है. तो इस तरह की बड़ी quality की issues आएंगे. तो और third point मैं कहूँगा कि इसमें ये जो international partners हैं, there's a major need. I mean, I belong to an organization which works heavily in this sector, but we do have to honestly reflect on, have we provided enough of is there enough of a coherent kind of support facility inside Pakistan to take all these discussions forward? I don't think so. I think there's several dozen initiatives at this point in time addressing segments of the problem, providing partial जो है support. ये सब कुछ record हो रहा है, तो मैं सोच रहा हूँ कि क्या होगा आगे. लेकिन but genuinely इसको अगर if we want to catalyze the space, right? So there could be one coherent facility, perhaps working closely hand in glove with the MOCC, and then doing the bits of work that are needed, helping give that capacity, doing the bits of work needed at other ministries, like with the finance ministry, their climate finance unit, provincial government से engage करें, interact करें, और private sector को भी एक project development facility तो create करें ना. I mean, Khurram, I know designs and can help figure out these projects. Who's going to pay for Khurram, by the way? He's a pretty expensive guy. And likewise, इस तरह तो नहीं, तो कोई facility हो जो कि ये private sector के पास जो है हमारी top companies ने अगर ये projects develop करने हैं, उनके साथ transact करके zero से लेके fruition तक and sale तक जो है वो hand holding कर सके. That's something worthwhile investing in, because as Bilal Sahab I think indicated, we're only like 15 years behind the curve. Oh, fantastic. So everybody has already done it. We're catching up. और 2040 में वो zero होके खत्म भी हो जानी है मार्केट. पहले ही $1 पे आ गया है. तो इसके अंदर जो है फिर अगर इसको सीरियसली करना है तो हमें अपना एक्सेलरेट कैसे करें. तो पता नहीं लोगों को अच्छे लगेंगे रिमार्क्स या बुरे लगेंगे, लेकिन मेरा ख्याल है कि ये these are a few of the practical suggestions where I do genuinely think that this sector could move forward by acting on these ideas, and this is where these what you would call the concessionary, the catalytic resources should come in this way, in a coherent way, which really moves things forward, because there's been a lot of, we expect this from this person, we expect this from that department, and so on. I don't think that's going to get us there. So maybe, voluntary is a great thing, but too much of a voluntary also can lead to bystander syndrome, where few people actually do anything. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you so much, Salam sir, for being so candid as well. So I think, Samira, if you would like to also sort of respond to any of the challenges, and I think one key point which he also mentioned was regarding the provincial coordination. So when we actually talk about these carbon trading, a lot of this also has to happen at the provincial level as well. So how should we be planning to ensure a seamless federal and provincial coordination, and fostering a unified approach that maximizes the potential of this as well?
It is a very, very important point, because projects would be executed at the level of provinces. The effective implementation of a project would require coordination between the federal government and the provinces. The Ministry of Climate Change, and so what I'm going to state now, it's also part of the policy guidelines. The Ministry of Climate Change and Environmental Coordination has worked out a procedure to develop a unified approach. The concept note approval for any project would be given by the ministry, and then a distinction has been made between a public-private entity with control of the resource on which the project is established. It will be called the managing authority, and will be responsible for maintaining the project transparency in the process of selection and awarding of project to the project proponent. So who is the project proponent? There is a project proponent, and it would be responsible for development, execution, implementation of a project, and or trading of carbon credits from eligible carbon trading projects. Second, the priority areas for carbon trading have also been identified, so that the provinces can choose projects according to their own climate change needs. Needs of Gilgit-Baltistan are different from Sindh or Punjab. Such as Sindh can select mangrove planting to stem erosion of land. Finally, capacities of both the federal ministry and the provincial departments for evaluating projects, which would be our task, and executing projects would need to be improved. And I believe that capacity building can lead to, better synergies between the federal government and the federated.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Samir. I think you have very well responded to the question as well. So I think, do we have any other suggestions, recommendations from our panelists before I move to the session chair, Dr. Sardar Mohsen? If you have any further comments from SAPS, okay. So with this, I'll be coming to Dr. Sardar Mohsen, the Managing Director at National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority. So you have been listening to some very challenges highlighted during the discussion. We also know that MOCC is now coming up with a framework. We also have to plan how we sort of try to remove the upcoming obstacles as well, and also the whole framework we have as of now. So based upon this discussion also, you have been working around this as well. So what do you suggest should be the way forward, and also your remarks for the session as well? So over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and I must appreciate SDPI for organizing this session. I think I have 2 points, especially from the slides, where we are just talking about light at the end of the tunnel and hope in the time of despair. I think the recommendations which I have been listening, especially, it seems like there is less hope and there is more sort of challenges. But I strongly believe from the government standpoint of view, and especially the way I see it, and my colleague from the Ministry of Climate Change has also highlighted some of the aspects which government has already considered, and steps are being taken in that direction. I think the second point from this slide I really want to highlight and discuss is when you're talking about effective implementation of carbon markets in Pakistan. So I think I just raise and looking it into a critical aspect is why carbon markets, is just a point this has been raised. But the moment we say carbon markets, I think it's more of a point of you're already thinking about a market where there's a buyer, there is a seller, and that we are trying to make it more effective. I think given some of my previous work with Ministry of Climate Change and internationally, I think the first study was on about the introduction of carbon pricing in Pakistan. And I think I've seen a number of proposals in that there should be emission target, trading schemes, systems, and cap and trade schemes, carbon pricing. So a lot of these ideas were discussed. I think especially there was another kind of thought at that time that how we make it as a tax neutral by just converting the petroleum development levy just into a carbon tax. And then we can show this or showcase that Pakistan has done the carbon pricing in the country. So I think there has been a number of very sort of ideas when we started working a few years back on this side, and then the whole CDM, the Kyoto Protocols, the Article 6, and the Paris Agreement, the rule book, and a lot of these things are coming up. I still believe that the carbon markets, especially when we're talking about the voluntary carbon markets framework, which is under process and the correspondence adjustments. For me, I think it's important on one side when we raise this question that our emissions are very less compared to the rest of the world. And then our emissions, we are basing it as our basis for like, you know, we are not emitting, so why we are doing this and that, one side of it. I think I'm also not as just like as a student of this whole thing, I'm raising this question from the ministry as well, that how much we are focused, especially on mitigation side compared to adaptation. Our fund NDMRF is more focused on disaster risk management. How much as a country we are looking into the climate change mitigation side. I think globally also this is a question mark, whatever we are saying, it's just a regret factor. My especially Secretary Power used to say it's a very most exciting statement for me that it's a regret factor that we are doing. Are we really doing or trying to do something for the climate change? And I think a lot of these mechanisms going into COP and then these kind of discussions. So some sort of, you know, less of hope and despair, which Arslan has mentioned. I think when we see globally, because it's non-binding, it's just voluntary. If there is no binding, how you can do it. So there are these sort of different questions if we look into more from the broader perspective, like where we are heading, what we really want to achieve with this. It's just a donor-driven thing that we are trying to do because there's some support coming in and we are trying to get it done with this thing. I think these are some of the question marks, which I just for food of thinking, like how we are going into that. Dr. Khalid showed a very interesting slides and I saw the Kuznets curve over there. We won't explain it, but I think this is some philosophical work done in the past in 1950s and 60s. And we have seen like how people are living slums, their income inequality or Gini coefficient affects how their incomes improves and they go out of this whole inequality and then income inequality affects to that. Understanding that whole idea that how we are dealing with that kind of matters, that also incorporates in some of your presentations. And also, I think designing a market where there are no externalities. So I think there is always a negative or positive externality, whatever in the way we frame all these questions. So I'm just trying to point out some of the work you have seen. So whatever we are trying to do with the pricing is just removing the negative externalities. In any economic transaction, either buyer or the seller, there are some negative externalities. Either we have to incorporate it into the price, or somebody has to pay for that, either maybe the society or the country, or it's a public good. So it's out there, nobody has to pay for it. So I think we have to understand also this concept, like it's very simple to say that the market design should be like this. Yes, in the West. But if we look into the Pakistani context, without strong regulations, without the regulatory frameworks, can we develop that kind of markets? I think I will compare the European carbon markets compared with the Chinese markets, and then you can go into the US and other countries. If you look into the carbon markets in these countries, Chinese markets are altogether different than what we are seeing in the US. So I think this is very important. Like, why we are talking about the carbon markets, because all those countries who have submitted their NDCs, 85% of these countries are asking for the carbon markets for international trade mechanisms and all of it. All the developing countries, when they look into these kind of mechanisms, ultimately they end up buying technologies. Ultimately, there will be a lead capture. So I think when I see this as you know, from a research perspective, as terms of some of these other aspects, these are very clear concerns which we see from that standpoint of view. But having said that, I think we mostly, the philosophy from the Ministry of Energy and then the discussions we come up with, is mostly we are addressing the law of the larger number. So looking at the Pakistan NDCs, and I think I will be more going into from the strategic or perspective of philosophical aspects to more towards tactical or operational aspects, that looking into Pakistan NDCs, and I think I was leading the mitigation part with the technical working group. While leading that aspect and working on a number of areas, we really understood one aspect: agriculture and energy, where we are producing most of the CO2 emissions. And I think looking at in both of them, the way the agriculture is scattered across the country, the outreach, the kind of challenges we are facing in that, I think in looking at the larger number, it's always been the energy sector of the country. Just a very simple example for some of the people sitting in this room. In the power sector, if you look into the demand patterns, in winter, our total demand is not more than 10 to 12,000 megawatts. In summer, it peaks up to 27, 28,000 megawatts. So where this 17 or 18,000 megawatt load comes from, how we create that demand? Just two things: air conditioning and fans. So in one of the discussions, and I think we have already presented, and there's active discussions going on, just replacing 140 million fans in this country, we could save 8,000 megawatts of electricity. It means if a coal-fired power plant generates 1,000 megawatts in peak summer days, that goes into this cooling of buildings and all this. So that is somewhere around 1,000 megawatts equal to one coal power plant, for example. It's a big number, maybe 8, 10, whatever the number can be. The coal power plants that can be worked out on that. So idea is that how Forum has already mentioned that some of these aspects that we should link with SDGs. We should have communities integrated with that. And I think also the project concept should be based on the quality. And maybe the project, maybe the small projects will have not a big thing. But I think at the same time, Arsalan contradicted that statement that the barrier to entry in the markets, that's a question mark. And then for the smaller projects, higher transaction cost is another question mark, like how you are going to do this in remote areas or some of these things. So I think this is where I feel like that some of these projects, how we can develop the market how we can have the critical mass. I think that's where we said that the regulations and then some of these projects, which I just mentioned, there are a number of other projects, they set the direction for the marketplace. With all these policies, we signal the market. We all signal the market players, like how to look into that direction. National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy, we calculated from the granular data, and we came up with this idea that somewhere around 9 million tons of oil equivalent can be saved, which equates to 35 million metric tons of CO2 emissions reductions. So there are a number of initiatives, there are a number of projects that has already been calculated. But I think this also leads to one of the functions that we have currently with us, that is launch of energy saving certificates. And these certificates definitely will be an instrument which we will, once we have these comments and the whole framework from the Ministry of Climate Change, will definitely highlight how these frameworks has been rightly spelled out in National Electricity Policy. That has already been reflected in the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Act 2016, and also National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Policy 2023. So I think in terms of different aspects, in terms of instruments that are needed, in terms of the direction where we are heading for, I think more or less from the government side, that's there. I think last part is where the businesses, as just Varun Lalani mentioned, like the readiness of the businesses. I mean, I think one of the aspects when I look into the captive power plants and some of these other power plants, I think most of the times, means it's in the slides, like if you're going to subsidize, if you give subsidies, that system is not going to work. So how you can bring in the efficiencies, how you can bring in this whole market mechanisms in place where you are actually looking into that is something worth selling or buying. That is where I think it's important that we have to look at from a very different dimension. And that is also the taxation, what kind of taxation and what kind of mechanisms we are going to put in place. That will be important. But I think, is it really the case that the markets are ready? Or market players, especially from the demand standpoint of view, are they ready? So I think that is where we see, I mean, most of the interactions, most of the discussions, we always see this despair, this lack of hope in the market side, like that is not possible. And I think that's where I think we are thinking, and that's where the area is to developing or sending this hope across the board, that if government, Ministry of Climate Change is coming up with this whole framework, if these instruments are there, if these kind of mechanisms are there, which are already under the development process, I think they should also, the market should also gear up. And then I think collaboratively and together with international support, we can move into that direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sadaf, for also showing us that hope in the times of despair as well. So I think before we move towards the conclusion, we have a lot of questions coming from the audience. So if we can have a mic over here, please. Okay. So please. If we have any questions from the audience, okay. Perhaps initially we can go to Dr. Imran and Ms. Aisha, both of them have asked a question.
Good evening. I'm Aisha Aziz. I'm the head of sustainability for Packages Group. I'm asking this question at the risk of sounding very illiterate in this, forum. For a company like ours, which caters to big brands, big international brands who've committed to net zero globally, we are under a lot of pressure to sign on to net zero ourselves. What does it mean for a private company like ours in Pakistan? If it's not compliance market, if it's voluntary carbon markets, what does it mean for us? We've been approached by multiple consultants because we have huge renewable energy projects and huge investments in this space. But I haven't been able to find an answer for that. So if we register our credits, if we are able to at some point, and we sell those credits, what happens to our net zero commitment if we make any?
Yes, if any of our panelists would like to respond. Yes, Khurram Saab, please.
So I think I'll just try and break down this question of yours into something that we can all come together to. Your net zero pledge is something which is we're all going towards. Every company, every individual, every corporate is going towards a net zero pledge. Now, how you reach to that pledge, I think requires an entire journey. So you first, quantify it, then you try and reduce your own emissions, whatever processes, improvements that you have to do. And then after that, if there is any scope of buying any offsets, you can do it. You can buy the offsets either from an exchange, either from a project under a voluntary carbon mechanism, or you could set up your own project to sort of, offset your own emissions. It really depends on the kind of way that you take.
Not about buying offsets. It's about because the misconception that I feel is in the market is that you make money out of carbon credits.
Correct.
So with our biomass boiler, we've been able to reduce about 60 to 70% of our own emissions in the last many years since it was commissioned. So in that case, because this is basically our decarbonization plan. So when somebody says that you need to sell your carbon credits, what does that mean for our decarbonization journey?
I think I'll just go a step back. So for example, if you have your own corporate emissions that you want to offset, now that's a very distinct versus if you want to sell the offsets, the credits that you have in the market. These are very two different set of propositions. So आप जो हैं वो अगर अपनी emissions खुद reduce कर रही हैं, so वो आप जो हैं वो you can set up either a project or you can buy from the exchange. If you are setting up a project, once you have offset your own emissions, if there are any residual emissions that you have, any extra credits that you have, you can essentially go to the market and sell the credits at the price which is going on at that point in time. So it really depends on a lot of factors. It depends on the number of emissions that you want to reduce at your corporate level, the market environment that you're operating in, at that point in time, whatever is the market price. It's not a straightforward answer. I can have that conversation with you offhand, and maybe for the benefit of the audience, I think it's just it's a long journey, and you don't really get to sort of I think that misperception is there amongst all the corporates that we can sell the carbon credits at a price and can benefit ourselves. I think that comes at a very tail end of the project, not at the beginning when you're offsetting your own emissions.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम, मेरा नाम खालिद है, I work with WWF, लेकिन ये क्वेश्चन है अपनी पर्सनल कैपेसिटी में पूछ रहा हूँ. There are two things जो मेरे जहन में आ रही थी. एक तो जो मैंग्रोव का प्रोजेक्ट है उसके बारे में अगर आप कोई बात कर सके, particularly in terms of some of the successes that we've had and some of the learnings that can be taken forward. If somebody can highlight that, I'd appreciate it. And then secondly, we've talked about how there is a guideline being developed. The question then becomes कि कितनी understanding है across the different sectors, across the government, local, provincial, national, vis-a-vis carbon markets. अगर हमारी understanding उस level पे नहीं है, तो perhaps हमारी input भी उस तरीके से नहीं आएगी, and then the end product might not really cater to the holistic needs of Pakistan as a whole. So in that regard, what can be done to ensure कि वो जो process है वो inclusive है? Yes, I'm glad that it has gone to the Climate Change Council, लेकिन what can be done to ensure कि वो जो capacity की जहाँ पे gaps हैं वो भी हम fill कर रहे हैं और साथ साथ इसको not to have a policy in place just because we want to have a policy in place by a certain date, but to ensure that the process is right, so that even if it's taking 6 months or a year, so by the time it's done, we really do have a complete document that has inputs from all relevant and key stakeholders. Thank you so much.
Delta Blue Carbon. So they established a project to plant, more mangroves in 2013. Why mangroves? Because mangroves, stop that, land erosion. And secondly, they sink carbon very quickly, 10 times more than, the normal trees that you see around yourself. So it's going well, the project is going well, but there's just one objection that, the corresponding adjustment is very high, and they are taking, 60% of the revenues that would be generated from the project. And then the timeline is very, lengthy. It's 60 years project. So that these are two objections, but otherwise it's a good project.
Very quickly, again, as Madam highlighted, the project started back in 2013. The first credits they were able to sell, I think, was 2022. So after 9 years, I mean, look at the journey that they've had. It's after 9 years. This is not something that, you install a project now, you get carbon credits tomorrow, then you can sell it day after tomorrow. You get $40 million in your kitty and you go home happy. I think that is not a journey that typically occurs. What occurs is that you have a long gestation project, you invest, you invest your time and resources and money and then all the human capital that you have. And it's a long gestation project. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of energy for the project to mature. And then, what other panelists already alluded to, after the verification, validation, the entire processes, then you get to a point where you can actually sell. So I think for any subnational government, for any Punjab government, KP government, I think if they want to venture into this, or even the federal government or any private sector, I think important is to understand that the journey is quite long. It typically takes 8, 9, 10 years for a project to materialize. And having said that, I think, it sort of goes back to your second question, where you talked about capacity. So unless the private sector has that capacity to be able to run a project for, that number of years, you won't be able to get very near to, that maturity level. So private sector needs to be agile, needs to be capable, has to be capacitated, make sure that they understand what the project life cycle is, and if they're able to then, execute. So it's a long journey. It requires a lot of training and development and continuous capacity building, but then only you are able to reap the benefits.
I will respond to it, very briefly, that the project took so long to materialize because it was one of its kind, the first project that was set up. But now, according to, the policy guidelines that will be finalized very soon, the project development timeline has been restricted to 1 year. If they don't develop a project within 1 year, they will have to go back and resubmit the concept note as well as the project. So this consideration has been taken.
Yes,
so that's a very good point. And I think I wasn't really referring to the project development cycle. I think I was referring to the time that it takes for any project developer to conceive a project and to be able to sell the carbon credits eventually. That's a long journey altogether.
Yes, thank you. I believe we have another question from Ruda, I guess. Yeah, please.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Deputy Director Ruda, and I'm also lead certified. With me is Madam Nadia, who is Director Environment. So I have a sort of mixed sort of question, taking Aslan's words as well. Why we simplify the process, like what I am perceiving? Why we need a foreign crediting agency to certify our credit? Like I give you an example. In Ruda, we have 100,000 of acres of land in our jurisdictions. And we are reviving the river Ravi, and we are making a planned urbanization. We have 9 forests within our jurisdictions. Now, what I am perceiving that we have existing industries in our jurisdictions. Why not we just estimate the emission of their carbon, and to offset that emission, we have the jungles here available. So just we identify some species of trees accordingly the best suitable in the environment and estimate their quantum to absorb or to expel oxygen into the environment. So why don't we make it simple in that way that we impose the fine or whatever the charges to the industries who are crossing certain emissions, and we being authorities certify that we investigate that and then we plant the trees accordingly. Can it be possible, sir?
बिल्कुल पॉसिबल है, लेकिन आप तभी करेंगे ना जब कोई पाकिस्तान बेस्ड इंसेंटिव होगा कि ये करें। ये हर चीज के लिए, मेरा तो ख्याल है हर चीज के लिए ये इंटरनेशनल मार्केट्स की जरूरत भी नहीं है। तो ये भी सोचना चाहिए कि जो डोमेस्टिक एक्शन बाय प्राइवेट सेक्टर है, आप जो बात कर रहे हैं वो है कि ये अर्बन डेवलपमेंट करेंगे जब आपकी अथॉरिटी, तो उसको कैसे ऑफसेट करना है। और वो चीज है जो कि प्रॉब्ली एक प्रोविंशियल मैटर है, उस पर एक प्रोविंशियल पॉलिसी होनी चाहिए कि इस लार्ज स्केल अर्बन डेवलपमेंट जो प्राइवेट सेक्टर कर रहा हो, तो हाउ कैन दे सिंपली हैव एन ऑफसेट ऑफ दैट थ्रू greening, plantation, and so on, which can be recognized and certified. So I would consider that sort of just a Pakistan-based action, जो कि बिल्कुल होना चाहिए। और इनफैक्ट ये इस तरह के जो simple measures, I think Sardar Sahab also talked about, many measures which have been considered and so on. Some of these local certifications of offsets, simple taxation measures, simple business incentives. There's a great need for all of that. Unfortunately, वो हम इतनी fast उस पे move नहीं कर सके अभी तक पाकिस्तान में, but we are having a lot of discussions about very complex markets that, as Khurram said, take 8-10 years to actually sell something in. That's not going to work for everyone, and ये आप खुद ही देख लें कि जब इतनी requirement है और इतना long gestation period है, not to conceive the project, लेकिन project तो बन गया, उसको assess करवाना है, verify कराना है, structure कराना है, credit की pricing, valuation करानी है credit, वो फिर sale होगा 8 years later. So ये तो it's I mean for basically it will work, it is working better for state authorities and state governments and generally larger private sector entities. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the market has also evolved out of such entities in Europe in general. So so again, वो ये वाला जो route है, this is a structured route which needs large actor participation, but आप ये वाले बिल्कुल कर सकते हैं।
Sir, my suggestion is that whereas the state is implementing and enforcing and developing the procedure, like in America, there are counties there, they have different rules, each county to county, their state to state. So even we have autonomous bodies like CDA, LDA, RUDA, they have jurisdictions. So they can make a workaround until unless the state is developing policy, we can later on dovetail with that. So what we are working on, we are thinking on that within our RUDA jurisdictions, we just start as a workaround like a POC, a small project, considering no revenue considering, just to benefit the environment. So we are actually thinking that that's why we are here. Actually, we will further discuss, we would like to discuss SDPI for their support as well. So thank you very much, sir.
I think it's a very progressive measure and should be encouraged.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think definitely we'll be definitely discussing this with you later on. So I think, okay, just Jawad, before you, if I could go to Asad Saab. Asad Saab, just very briefly, please go ahead. If we can have a mic up there, yeah.
जी अस्सलाम वालेकुम। मेरा जो है वो क्वेश्चन जिस तरह सारे पैनल मेंबर्स ने कहीं और जो हमारे पार्टिसिपेंट्स हैं उन्होंने भी कहीं जो है इस चीज़ नुक्ते की तरफ इशारा किया कि जो CDM है हम उसमें जो है ना अक्सर हमारा एक जुमला बॉटम लाइन आती है कि वी मिस्ड दैट बॉट, यूटिलाइज नहीं कर सके कार्बन प्राइसेस, मतलब जब वो ख़त्म हो गया तो फिर हम उस तरफ के। अरसलान साहब ने जिस तरह बताया कि जब तक हम शायद स्टार्ट हों तो उस वक्त तक प्राइसेस माइट भी फिर पीक के बाद बॉटम डेट लेवल पे आ जाएं। तो एक जनरल क्वेश्चन है जिसमें मैम फ्रॉम MOCC परस्पेक्टिव या बाकी भी अगर देना चाहें कि जब जो स्ट्रक्चर लाइक CDM के कंटेक्स्ट में जो एक अप्रूवल या एक जो प्रोजेक्ट्स को ड्यू डिलिजेंस करने का जो स्ट्रक्चर था वो मतलब स्ट्रक्चर इट वाज नॉट सॉर्ट ऑफ परमानेंट स्ट्रक्चर। सो अभी जब आप पॉलिसी फ्रेमवर्क लेकर आ रहे हैं वॉलंटरी कार्बन मार्केट्स का, तो इसके बैकएंड पे क्या एक ऐसा स्ट्रक्चर एग्जिस्ट करता है या बनेगा जो इसको लॉन्ग टर्म सस्टेनेबिलिटी दे सके, जो कि CDM के अंदर was the missing thing over there due to adhocism or things like that.
Yes, thank you, Sasab. Ma'am, if you'd like to respond.
I will respond to the part of, as far as the government is concerned. So apart from the, apart from these policy guidelines, we are also working on governance platform to provide guidelines to the market. Then there will be, monitoring and reporting and verification system that would be aligned with the international market to provide more transparency. And the institutional framework of the government will also be changed, So we are planning to strengthen MOCC. There will be a carbon cell, and that will coordinate with the provincial departments. And the provincial departments will have their own, carbon cells. Then there will also be legal structure. So legal structure would also be changed. Why we need legal structure? Because, there would be contracts between the parties. So we need some legal mechanism to enforce those contracts. But there's just a movement or trajectory towards, towards the mechanism. And I think the time frame for complete governance mechanism is December 2022. 2 years away.
Yeah, thank you. But just to, again, if you want to play in continuation to your points, as per your Climate Change Authority Act, like carbon markets and things like that have to be looked into by that platform, the authority. So
there is no Climate Change Authority as yet, but it would be set up.
But act is
there is Climate Change Council under the Climate Change Act 2017, but Climate Change Fund has not been set up, neither Climate Change Authority.
So again, this cell is
cell
not having
be,
a legal backing in this
MOCC.
context.
MOCC.
Okay.
Thank you. I think just in the interest of time, Jawasab, we can have your question during the informal discussion after the panel. So once again, a round of applause for all the panelists here today. So, and with this, I'll be inviting Dr. Zainab for her final word of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Obed, for being such a great moderator. STPI takes its pride in its strong collaboration with the Danish Embassy. They have been providing support to STPI for this initiative that we have taken. And let me share this, that STPI, we do understand that the term carbon markets has its own challenges and it's a complex term. Not many of us understand the basic difference between offsets, credits, and markets. So that's what we decided initially, to build capacities first, create awareness, and then we can discuss on whether VCMs should be there or not. But for VCMs, we have Government of Pakistan, the Ministry of Climate Change taking, as Madam mentioned here, taking initiative to develop some regulation around it. So I believe we are in the right direction, and by the time there's regulation, we'll be in a better position to understand what we mean by carbon markets and how collaboration can support the transformation that is needed. At least we have started talking about it. So I especially would like to thank our esteemed panelists today, Mr. Arslan, Mr. Khurram Lalani, Dr. Muhazzim, and Madam, special thanks to you for joining us today for this representing public sector. And we have been doing a TOT for building capacities in the public sector, and we'll be doing another TOT with private sector, with the social media influencers, and we'll be taking this TOT in the provinces as well. So we invite all of you for this collaboration, whether you're from public sector or private sector and even academia, because we would like to have this mechanism established in Pakistan. Thank you once again, and I hope you have understood and enjoyed what our esteemed panelists have shared with all of you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.